So my name is Karis Wall. I am an audio producer and facilitating this session. So after we've listened to it, if you have any questions, if you can write them in the chat and I will read those out to Tommy afterwards. So in every session, always on a Friday, a different industry leading audio producer shares a piece or an extract of their work, and we'll listen together and then talk about it afterwards, talk about the piece, the creative process, how it came into the world. And today I'm delighted to have Tommy with us. So can you please introduce yourself and then tell us a bit about yourself and the strange story, how you got into audio?
You want that story? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Tommy Dixon. I am a content producer for the BBC. I work at BBC Audio, currently at the BBC World Service on a program called Outlook, which is all about telling the incredible life stories of people from all around the world. How I got into audio is a very long and convoluted story that could be a podcast of itself.
Or an audiobook.
Or an audiobook. I won't bore you with that. But previously I used to work in the world of engineering. So bridges, structures, everything really. So I used to be a mechanical engineer. I did a degree at the University of Leicester. But as part of my degree, I had a year in industry. So I went off to go work for our national railway infrastructure manager, Network Rail, up in Milton Keynes. So every single day I was taking a 2-hour journey from Southeast London to Milton Keynes. And on this train journey, I discovered this thing called podcasts. I was on Spotify. So I basically spent a whole year listening to podcasts, going back and forth. And I fell so in love with them that when I came back for my final year in uni, I decided I'm going to try this thing out for myself. And I started my very first podcast, which was called the Tea and Waffles podcast, because you have tea. And as you can hear, evidently, I love to waffle along. So Tea and Waffles.
That's a wonderful name.
Thank you. There's a very, very crazy story about how I came up with the name as well. But I won't go into that. But essentially, I made that podcast, produced that podcast, presented that podcast for a period of time. And that led me to work with Transmission Roundhouse, where I created a spin-off version of Tea and Waffles, where I dabbled into other things like sound design, scripting. It sort of really opened up my palette to all the techniques that you can use to be able to create a podcast more immersive and more creative. And from that, I got the opportunity to work on my next project, which you're going to hear a piece of shortly. Called Colouring in Britain, which I made with BBC Sound's Audio Lab, which was an accelerator scheme to help young audio creatives have their ideas commissioned and produced and have their own BBC podcasts. So that's kind of how I took my first steps into becoming a professional within the audio industry.
And was there, when you were on the train to Milton Keynes for 2 hours every day, was there a particular podcast that, set you off and made you think, okay, this is wonderful? Or was it just podcasts in general and your discovery of them? Was there one that...
Yeah. Funny enough, it was, I feel like the official first one that I listened to was Abroad in Japan. And that was hosted by this guy called Chris Broad. And it was around that time, like I was kind of thinking about going into engineering, but also I was thinking maybe I might want to be a teacher in Japan. So I was watching this YouTube channel, and then I found out that they had a podcast. And I was like, what the hell is this podcast? What's that? So then I listened to the podcast, and that was officially the first one. But the one that really, really, really took me in was HC Podcast, which is hosted by Chucky Online, who is a presenter on BBC One Extra, and his friend Poet. So yeah, that was like the first podcast, and I was just like, I think I'd listened to some other podcasts, but I think it was the fact that they were two Black guys from London, and they were talking about things that related to me, and I was just like, wow, okay, cool. This feels like it's close to home. maybe I can do this. And that was kind of like the first one. I was like, okay, cool, let's try this.
That's lovely. It does sound a bit, Tommy, like you really didn't want to be an engineer though. Because on one hand you were like, oh, maybe I'll be an audio producer. On the other hand, you were like, maybe I'll just go to Japan and teach. You were searching for excuses anywhere you could find them.
Yeah, you know what? You know what? It's that that thing about discovery, like things that you're meant to do, I guess they come and find you. So I was looking for it, whether it be a podcast, whether it be in Japan. I was really, really open. So but yeah, I guess podcasting and audio was my thing.
Wonderful. So, if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about a bit more about colouring in Britain, but specifically also this episode? So, what we're gonna hear today?
Ooh, okay. So, my podcast that I created was called Coloring in Britain. So, the concept of it was that I wanted to document the lives of influential Brits of color. But more than that, I wanted to take you to moments in history where they had changed or shaped the country that we live in. And I want to showcase figures in history that people may, but more likely don't know about. And I wanted to showcase to them why it is that we should be speaking more about some of these lesser known and lesser recognized figures within history, because their impact to the country that we live in is just as valid as some people that you might have heard of when you were back in school, whether they be Henry VIII or Oliver Cromwell, etc. So yeah, and it was born from that period within COVID, where there was a lot of conversations we were having about history, but also the experience of people of color, really, all around the world. And I think a real touching point for me I guess a catalyst, I would say, was the Euros final, when the three young men, Bukayo Saka, Jadon Sancho, and Marcus Rashford, stood up and went to go and take those penalties, and the fallout from all of that. And I had lots of conversations with friends and internal conversations, and I basically wanted to question this notion of what Britishness is and the stories that we tell and what we consider to be British history. But why is it that certain stories are told more than other ones? So to challenge these notions, I was like, I'm going to find some stories of people who I'm very much inspired by, but also people that I feel like everyone should know about too. So that's why I created Colouring in Britain. And this first story, well, no, not the first story, but the story that you're going to hear, you can listen to the other ones, available on BBC Sounds, and all other digital platforms where you get your podcasts. But this
you
story,
contractually, you have to say BBC Sounds first.
no. It's just I'm very much used to saying BBC Sounds, but yeah, get on BBC Sounds first. So yes, this piece that you're about to hear is about someone who I was inspired by when I was in school. This is the poet, the writer, the late great Benjamin Zephaniah. I discovered him when I was in English class, and it was that I think it was what was the first book? It was Refugee Boy. That was the first book that we read of his, and I remember just like my English teacher, Miss Ade, she was like an incredible teacher, but she was I remember when we read that book and they were talking about places that, and whether it be Brixton, or they were talking about what it's like to be yeah, Wing Chun master as well. Yeah. Yeah, or what it's like to have immigrant parents. Like there were stories and experiences that you just didn't get when you were reading a Philip Pullman, or Cressida Cowell, or it was different, and it touched me. And his story, Benjamin's story, was super important, and I wanted to put that one first because it was such a personal story to me. And what I find really, really touching about podcasts is the why. Why are you telling these stories? What is your connection to these stories? And I think ultimately that's the essence of storytelling. If you have a strong enough why for why you're embarking on this journey, people will want to follow along. So that's how I decided to start Colouring in Britain. And I hope you guys enjoy when you listen to this piece. Just to let you know, we're talking about a period in the 70s and 80s Britain where there are themes of racism, police brutality, and also there's a mention of domestic violence as well. So that there are a few things just in that, just for you haven't listened, but I hope you guys enjoy.
Great. Thank you so much for that excellent background of it. So I'm going to play it now and ask everybody to please turn off their cameras and mics and just listen. And then the piece is 37 minutes long. And then at the end, we'll please send any questions into the chat, and at the end we'll hear the answers. Okay, I'm going to start playing it now, and hope you can hear this.
BBC Sounds, music, radio, podcasts.
It's playing
This
now.
podcast
so
contains adult themes, strong language, and deals with issues of racism.
My name is Tommy Dixon, and just like you, I'm a part of history. I experienced the heights of a pandemic during 2020, a moment that changed ways of living and thinking collectively across the world, a moment that will always be remembered in history. In that period, there were many moments that I can never forget.
That's why we're all here. There's not just black people, there's so many different types of people.
We need change. We demand change. Period.
Amen.
I think it's amazing so many people have turned up today because it's important. And I think it's important for a lot of white people to turn up as well, to say that you're not alone in this.
The 25th of May, 2020. A recording on an iPhone that lasted 9 minutes and 29 seconds. George Floyd. A 46-year-old African-American man was murdered by police in Minneapolis, Minnesota. A death that sparks conversations and actions worldwide. I'd just come back home to London after finishing my last year in university. That summer in London and across many other cities in the UK, protests were being held in support of the Black Lives Matter movement in the US. People saw the result of racial injustice, and that raised conversations of discrimination and injustice present here in the UK. But one city in particular made the headlines. Bristol in the southwest of England. And it partly inspired this podcast. The statue of Edward Colston, a merchant and trader born in Bristol. The statue was pulled down and dragged into the Bristol harbour during the protests, and there was a reason why this specific statue was targeted. The statue was created to celebrate Colston as a philanthropist, but since the 1990s, debates have been ongoing in the city why he's been celebrated at all. His plaque reads, erected by the citizens of Bristol, as a memorial of one of the most virtuous and wise sons of their city. Which might be true, but what's left out is that some of the wealth he donated was made from the transatlantic slave trade, an industry that saw the transport and enslavement of millions of Africans to the Americas, and Colston was deeply involved. He was an active member and briefly deputy governor of the Royal African Company, a company endorsed by the British monarchy and responsible for transporting slaves. If I was to pause there, that summer would be a perfect summary of how non-white British history was taught to me growing up. Slavery and African-American racial injustice. Some would say British history as we know it is a bit like that Colston statue in Bristol. It's full of omissions and exclusions because many of the stories told don't include all the people who make up British history. So for the next few episodes, I'm going to be your guide, as I plan to fill in some of those gaps. Each episode is a walk through the life of a British figure you may or may not have heard of before, and a look into moments that I think makes them worthy of a place in the history books. I've dramatised some moments in their lives, but rest assured, it's all based on factual events. But before you get comfortable, I got to make sure that the setting is just right. So I thought it'd be only right to take you back to the place where I learned about history. Class is ready to begin, and this is Colouring in Britain.
If you haven't selected a book, pick one now. Go and sit down, please.
So the first lesson we've got is English. And just a quick disclosure, I've always had a love for books, for as long as I can remember. So much that it actually became a problem in school. In fact, the exact words of my year 4 teacher to my mum at parents' evening was, "I didn't think I'd have to tell a child to stop reading until I met your son."
"Welcome to England, Mr. Kilo," said the immigration officer as he handed back the passport.
That's my teacher, reading part of Refugee Boy. A story about a boy named Alam who escaped war on the border of Eritrea and Ethiopia with his dad, and finds himself having to adapt to living in the UK. One of the reasons why I loved books so much was language. It was the way that authors would use words to paint pictures of stories that could be close to home or far from reality. They would bring their characters to life to take me and my imagination on a journey page by page. Books gave me an escape and made me realise how powerful language can be.
"From now on, you must try to speak English. You must practice your English. All right, young
What's
man?"
significant about this particular book is that it was my first encounter of a dub poet that you might have heard of before.
"So your name Lorna? All right, Sister Lorna, meet me round the corner, make me dub it really hard. My name is A.K.A. Me come to take you higher than the flyer, a Ricky Raya." You know.
He uses language and music and poetry to take on injustice at home in Britain and worldwide with the wickedest of flows. Hailing from Handsworth, Birmingham, he goes by the name of Benjamin Zephaniah.
"Me can't believe it. Me say me can't believe it. Room for rent I apply within, but Lord, me say me can't believe it."
I never thought I'd get to meet, let alone interview one of the authors I'd read about in school. I don't know what it is about books, but if the story seems so far away, the creators felt even further. However, one morning in March 2022, I took the train up from London King's Cross to Peterborough. By 12, I was sat on a blue sofa in a small room of a community space for artists. And opposite me was Benjamin Zephaniah, sunken into his own sofa asking if he sounded okay just before we press record.
Right.
Maybe about a week ago.
Right.
And I was on Soho Road.
Right.
I was a little nervous, tripping over my words and still flicking through my iPhone for notes. So I rambled a little bit more than I should have. But having been through so many interviews, Benjamin put the conversation back on track.
No, I was just thinking about my first time.
So the interview actually started and we went from top to bottom.
"Benjamin, this is the last kettle of hot water I'm going to do for you. You better wash yourself through and through. Don't you think I have better things to do? Carry me up, good old State Market, not a quarter would sell. Carry me up, good old State Market, not a quarter would sell. Come now, Benjamin, out of that bath. Don't make me come over there. Come over here and let me do your hair."
My love for reading came from my mum. I don't think I can recall a night where I could walk into her room and not see a blue bedside lamp on and her eyes fixed on the latest novel that she just picked up, until she noticed who'd come through the doorway. Benjamin's love for language and rhyme came from his mum too. Benjamin told me about how his mum would wash him and his siblings in their outdoor tin bath, and the source of his rhyme made perfect sense. The little rhythms and rhymes his mum would recite to them off the cuff about cooking recipes or old Caribbean sayings would just catch on and shape how he used language, even before he knew it was art. This was one of the reasons why he got into dub poetry.
Well,
but he told me he had another big love.
It's interesting I start to figure out where did I get my love for music from. It was just always there. It was always there. But there's a pivotal moment in my life when somebody made me aware of how important music was, reggae music in particular, and Bob Marley in particular.
Benjamin actually wrote to Bob Marley whilst he was still an up-and-coming poet, as well as many other artists that he looked up to. But Marley was the only one who ever wrote back, replying, "Keep it up, stay militant." Benjamin went on and described how music would actually get into his house.
I was always into music. When uncles and aunties were coming from Jamaica, they would arrive. Some of them would actually stay at our home because they've literally just arrived, or they would be staying locally. They would come and they would have like a suitcase, they'd open up the suitcase with stuff from Jamaica. So there was some yam, there was some ackee, there was some breadfruit, and there was always some records, 7-inch records. And you put them on the record player, and we just look at the excitement on our parents' face. And we knew it, well, I certainly knew it was something important to them. It was connecting them back with home. And so I grew up kind of listening to that kind of ska and mento music, which is the music that kind of came before ska.
What's mento?
Mento is like a traditional Jamaican music. A lot of it is kind of, the lyrics will come from Jamaican folk tales or almost kind of nursery rhymes or little stories. Carry me a Kigoa lipstick market, not a quite they would sell. About selling the fruit in the market and you're not selling none, or Sammy plant piece of can down a gully and it be here till it kill poor Sammy. Sammy dead, Sammy dead, Sammy dead, oh. Sammy dead, Sammy dead, Sammy dead, oh. Must a thief, Sammy thief, make them kill him. And they've always got a moral behind it, you know, some kind of message behind it. So I remember all that stuff.
Benjamin is a dub poet, which is a spoken word poetry style born in the West Indies and performed over a reggae beat.
And then there was the poets, and in particular Miss Louise Bennett. You see, when people talk about the king of reggae and the king of rock and roll and all that stuff, when it comes to dub poetry, there is no king, there is a queen. Louise Bennett is the queen of dub poetry. She really started it all. And I remember like listening to Louise Bennett on record. She was called Louise Bennett or Miss Lou, same person.
Yeah.
And just thinking, wow, you know, she makes music without music. She makes music just with her words.
Benjamin grew up in Handsworth in Birmingham in the 70s. His mum Jamaican and his father Barbadian. Benjamin was one of 8 children. Handsworth is a pretty multicultural part of the city, home to many working class people. White British, South Asian, Irish travellers, people from the Caribbean, and many more. Despite the variety of communities present in the city, Benjamin told me that tolerance wasn't always present.
Go back home to Africa! If I see you again, it'll be worse!
As well as having a turbulent experience in his neighbourhood, Benjamin mentioned seeing abuse in his home between his mum and dad. This led to a breaking point, and one day his mum rushed to leave the family home, only able to take Benjamin with her. They looked for safety in women's refuges, but were rejected because they were black. Eventually, they found refuge in a church, where Benjamin's mum would become an established member. On a particular Sunday, Benjamin's mum was called to give testimony, but instead of providing it, she did something different.
In Matthew 19:26, it says, "But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Yes, Lord! I want to say that again because I want to make sure every member of this congregation hears these words. With men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Hallelujah! Have faith in God with your problems and He'll answer you. Yes, Lord! I want to call on someone in the congregation to testify what God has done for you that you thought was impossible. Doesn't matter how big or small, share with your brothers and sisters how Christ has blessed your life. Hallelujah, the Spirit! Sister,
I'm tired at the moment, Pastor. But my son Benjamin has been blessed with a talent and wants to do a poem for everyone.
This was the scenes of Benjamin's first live performance. He didn't have any poems for church, but what he did have was a great memory. He used what he learned in Sunday school for this performance. He got up, danced, and recited the names of the books in the Bible to a scar rhythm.
Goodness, sister. The boy is blessed. Favor like this is truly a gift. You're treasured, my boy. Treasured like Zephaniah.
Some people thought he was a prophet, and he was given the name Zephaniah, meaning treasured by God, or the Lord has protected, which would have been a good summarization of how they felt in the church, but outside was a different matter. His dad worked at the postal service, so we could always find out where Benjamin and his mum were hiding out, and would go looking for them. Benjamin told me about this experience.
My father was very violent towards my mother, and I remember going to supermarkets, stuff like that, mainly not supermarkets actually, like vegetable stores, and holding my mother's hand, and my job was to turn and look for my father. And as a little kid, I used to look up. Like this. This is not good podcasting or radio, but I'm looking up now, right? And I literally had to look up to see the adults' faces because I'm below their waist sometimes, you know? What does the world look like that? And I remember seeing, Daddy, Mom, run! And we had to run.
As we spoke further, I started to realise how complex Benjamin's upbringing had been. He became a protector for his mum at an early age and struggled in school due to his dyslexia. He became involved in gang life with stealing cars, burglary, and fighting being on the agenda. He was eventually sent by the court to approved school, which is where students were sent if you committed offences or were seen as beyond parental control. Soon after, he left full-time education at just 13.
I remember getting in trouble with my dad once, and one of my uncles took me to one side and he said, you're always acting bad, you got to start behaving. So I was like, what do you want me to do then? And he said, well, listen, you got to do your schoolwork, and then when you come out of school, you get an apprenticeship, because in those days, black people didn't go to university. Get an apprenticeship, and then you find a nice Jamaican girl, and you settle down, and then you buy a house and get a mortgage, and have a baby or two, start a little family, and live happily together. Then I said, well, what next? And he went, well, you die. I was like, is that it? You know what I mean? Is that it? And I remember thinking, seriously, if that's it, maybe I'll just cut to the chase now and just die now. Maybe I'll just end it now. Because if this is what life is, if this is what my family want me to do, and this is how they'll measure my success, well, that's not how I see success. So let's cut to the chase. And then I thought, no, I want to do something with my poetry. I want to inspire people.
Now, I can imagine a young Benjamin trying to navigate and make sense of this difficult period in his life, and dub poetry became a meaningful outlet. His experience shaped his art. Powerful delivery from seeing pastors in church, and his content was politics live from the streets. His performance poetry style gave him a unique way to express his thoughts and feelings on the world around him, in a way in which traditional poetry and institutions didn't appreciate at the time. In Birmingham, he'd established himself as a well-known dub poet, but in his early 20s would want to stretch further beyond with both his poetry subjects and the people he was performing to.
I was in Birmingham, and I was looking out at the world, and I was writing poems about Northern Ireland, Vietnam, Black Power movement in America, all kinds of things. Quite simplistic poetry, actually. I mean, not deep poetry, but it was my thoughts, it was my response to these things.
A few weeks before my interview, I had watched Benjamin's documentary, Pen Rhythm. It had been created by Channel 4 in 1983, when it had just started out as a new channel looking to create more diverse television and aiming to be a voice of the people. Part of the documentary was a performance in London from a 20-something-year-old Benjamin Zephaniah. Mic in hand, eyes closed, dreadlocks framing his face as he burst into poetic rants. There was mixed response from the crowd during the performance. Some laughed at the one-liners and punchlines, but in others, dead silence. As Benjamin described, bar for bar, the experience of almost getting beaten to death by the police. Everyone was fixed by the performance until the end, when the place burst into applause. This performance in London was different to many of the other shows that he had done in Birmingham, as this audience was mainly white, which was a contrast to the mostly black audience that he had back in Birmingham. So I asked Benjamin what that transition was like.
I was in the Albany in Deptford, and it was a Troops Out gig. There was a campaign organisation called Troops Out of Northern Ireland, trying to get the British troops out of Northern Ireland. So I was in this gig, and there was this Irish girl in a beautiful dress. There's nothing like an Irish girl in a beautiful dress, I tell you, man. So this Irish girl, me and her start talking now, and I'm dropping some lyrics on her.
So, what do you do?
She's asking me what I do, and I said, well, it means I'm a poet, you know. Right. And this time I'd never performed in London, so I said, I'm a poet.
Oh, an artist. I like that.
And then she said, you know, I wish I could do an Irish accent, but I can't.
Can I get you a drink?
And I said, yeah, I'll get an orange, I'll have an orange juice or something. And she left me. And the next thing I saw was her on stage saying,
Sorry, everyone, I've got a friend over there who's a poet. Can you come up on stage and do a poem for us, young man?
So I came on stage, and I used to have a poem that used to go, get the troops from out of Ireland, let them sort things out themselves. Every country has their problems, they don't need your shotgun shells. If the IRA is bombing, it might be Parliament to blame. How come people talk to soldiers? Don't you know that they have shame? Get the troops from out of Ireland. Wow! You know what I mean? This black guy getting up and expressing exactly what they're about. And yeah, I got a date with that girl.
Call me.
Did you? Yeah, man. You know what I mean? The revolutionary poetry boy.
That was Benjamin's first performance in London, and he would continue to show up in various locations around the city, finding his platform for poetry in the punk and reggae scene, which sounds a little bit like oil and water, right?
And then there was the punk scene, and the reggae scene, which crossed over in many ways, because a lot of punks didn't have records. So when they did a gig, in between the bands, they play reggae music. I mean, Don Letts really started that, this DJ called Don Letts. But the punks loved their reggae.
Punks were kind of like the grime kids of the 70s and early 80s. Anti-establishment, DIY, and a new underground sound. Benjamin told me he would go to punk shows asking to perform his poetry ahead of bands to warm up their crowds, and people go crazy for it. Eventually he got so popular, bands would send requests for him to come and perform.
And people used to get very confused and think, well, why? Especially now when people look back, they say, well, punk is going at 100 miles an hour. I am an anarchist, I am the antichrist. And reggae is going so slow, it's going backwards. But why? Because we were living on the same council estates, you know, we were policed in the same manner, and very importantly, when you want to understand this story, the National Front hated us both. The National Front hated the punks because they were open-minded and freaky, and they hated the blacks because we were black and freaky, right? So, you know, we joined together.
Benjamin, I loved your set, man. We've got a rally in Deptford next week for the miners' unions. I was hoping you'd be able to join.
Oi! What are you looking at? Don't move! Hey, hey! Where do you think you're going? Go on, lads! Get him! Oi!
Oh, not again.
Where do you think you're going? Get him,
No,
lads!
it's going to kick off.
Teach him a lesson
Now, let's
and
get
never
out of here.
forget. That's it! Get right in there! How many times do we have to tell you? You're not welcome around here!
Benjamin mentioned the National Front, which was a far-right fascist group formed in the 60s and operated around the country. In the early 80s, where punks and rastas were on the streets protesting about policing, high unemployment, homelessness and racism from the National Front, Zephaniah's words could be heard at demonstrations, on the dance floor, outside police stations and the front lines of uprisings like the Brixton riots.
I have a poem that goes, if you get uptight and you want to fight, fight them, not me. If you check out the scene and things don't right, see them, not me. I care my saw, I live here, and I have my tribulation to bear. If you're getting uptight and you really want to fight, fight them, not me. If you live in a kitchen and you can't afford chicken, blame them, not me. If the taxi pay is high and you live up in the sky, see them, not me. I come from afar, but me live here, and all I want is an equal share. If you're getting uptight and you really want to fight, fight them, not me. I mean, it goes on and on.
Benjamin's poetry was special because of its message, and also how he delivered it. His ability to perform on stage and television popularised dub poetry, bringing it live and direct to British living rooms.
I always feel very old when I start talking about things like this, but I am very old, so... But sometimes I think it's hard for people to appreciate now that there was so few outlets for your anger. People were desperate to be heard. And so when a poet got up and said something, it meant a lot to people, especially with what I started doing, which was putting dub poetry on television. When I did This Policeman Keeps on Kicking Me to Death on television, I mean, it was very powerful when I did it live, and there was all this talk about this poem that this guy had done, this Benjamin Zephaniah guy. But when I'd done it on television, and it reached millions of people in one hit. Remember, in those days, there's only three channels, 4 when Channel 4 came in. Yeah. That's it. So when you did something on television in those days, you know that most of the people in the country saw it. And there was no replays, there was no, catch up.
Channel 4+1.
Oh yeah, all that kind of stuff. And so the word got round. The next day, I couldn't go out in London. People saw it, and people who sometimes had that very same experience was like, wow, I got beat up in a police station, I almost died, and that's exactly what it was like. It really had a very powerful effect,
Benjamin became a spokesperson for the voiceless. So much that whilst he was living in East London, a wall of a roundabout in Stratford got spray painted with the nickname he got in the East End. Beware, because the bard of Stratford is here.
That was a moment, because, I mean, some people would say it's about having your name up in lights, but for me, it was like having my name up in graffiti. It was like, yeah, I've arrived. This is it.
He had arrived. In fact, it was once said that Benjamin was Britain's most filmed, photographed and identifiable poet. But even though he was known, that didn't make him exempt from the racism in the media. This is an article run in the Sun newspaper in 1987.
Would you let this man near your daughter? On Friday, he is expected to become a Cambridge Don. Just what are his qualities which have appealed to Trinity College? He is black. He is a Rastafarian. He has tasted approved schools and borstalls. And, oh yes, he is a poet.
You must have read about it in Life and Rhymes. I used to have a red GT6 sports car, which was really unusual to see a black guy in such a nice sports car. It used to stand out. To this day, when I go back to Birmingham, I go, yeah, man, you were the dread with that sports car. You know what I mean? It's like, it really stood out. Yeah. Young black men just didn't have that many cars then. And if they did, it was like little runarounds. So to have this was seen almost like a supercar. It's not a supercar, but at the time, it was seen like a supercar. Oh, yeah. And a police officer stopped me, and he just said,
"Can I see your documents?"
And I showed him the documents, and I didn't realise that I had the document of the receipt when I bought the car. And he looked at me and said,
"You walked into a showroom and you bought this car? Cash?"
I said, "Yeah." He said,
"I'm a white man. born in this country, gone to school in this country, graduated in this country, working in this country, and I can't go into a showroom and buy this car in cash. Where did you get the money from?
I said, none of your business. I said, all you need to know is that I bought it cash and it's legal. And he said,
I'm taking it from you.
He took it from me. I walked home. And then I got a message from my mother, months later, saying that she got a message saying that to come and collect the car. And she went round to see the car, and it was, all the dashboard was ripped out. They thought I was a drug dealer or something. So they took the car apart. And my mother took them to court and won. But yeah, that was really jealousy.
Yeah.
You know, the guy is saying, how can you, a young black guy, afford all this and I can't? Well, I'm taking it from you until I find out how you got it.
Yeah. And that sort of thing was just regular back then?
Regular.
Yeah.
You know, I'm walking down the street in Birmingham one night at 12 o'clock in the night, the police car stops, they jump out, they just beat me up, jump back in the car.
That's it, hop in or hop out?
Just, yeah. You know, do you know what it was like with the National Front? I mean, they used to come to our dances and wait outside. And when you come out, they just jump on you and beat you. Or they hide around a corner or something. They follow people. And when they get to a place where they think they can get away with it, they jump you and just beat you. Yeah. I mean, their mission was to get rid of black people in Britain.
I was listening to Benjamin talk so candidly about his experience with racism from the police, media and National Front. And all I could think of is that if I was him, would I have been able to keep going? Benjamin even spoke about how his family viewed his work and how they feared he would be assassinated. But once again, he's cool as ice. Talking openly about this experience wasn't shocking to him because he lived it, and it's only motivated his work further. It lent a hand to causes he supported and those who needed it. In Britain and internationally, like the support of Nelson Mandela and the abolition of apartheid in South Africa. Quite famously in 2003, Benjamin was offered an OBE, which he refused because of the legacy of the British Empire and colonialism represented by those three letters. He remained true to his anti-imperial stance his poetry had always taken. After hearing everything Benjamin had been involved with, I started to think about my introduction to him, and I couldn't understand why he switched the literal front lines for literature aimed at young people.
So I actually want to ask, in terms of, you know, empathy and putting people within the shoes of the main character, why young adult books? Why did you delve into that? What is it about young people? What is it about children that you wanted to allow them to empathise with the main character?
I was just going to say, it's not just young adults, it's children as well. Yeah. That's another thing. I just said that we can't all be black, we can't all be white, we can't all be gay, we can't all be straight. I say it again, right? But we were all once children. We were all once young. And that's something people seem to forget very quickly.
I discovered Benjamin in books like Refugee Boy and Face, which place readers in the unfamiliar shoes of the main character and their complex problems. Relating to someone's problems isn't always easy, but empathising with the truth of their situation and relating with their humanity is always something that has stayed consistent in Benjamin's work.
I don't want to sound a bit like a hippie, but we're just human beings.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And everything else is just a matter of chance of birth and where you're grown up, and if it's religion, what, you know, your parents' religion, all that kind of stuff. So I'm a human being struggling to survive in England. I identify as black because that's the community I was raised in, but I care about the white Irish woman just as much as I cared about the black Nigerian man. I cared about the Iraqi Muslim just as much as I cared about somebody from Peru. You know, and that liberates me from all these other labels.
Yeah.
You know, and like a lot of young people, when I was younger, I really struggled with all these things about identity. But life is too short.
Yeah.
You know, life is too short, man, and you really need to get as much sex as possible.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, no.
So, you know, you can't be worried about the colour too much, man.
This pretty much summed up my chat with Benjamin. Some sentences were poetic and structured around a poignant theme, and others were just matter of fact. Then out of nowhere, you get hit with a one-liner you couldn't help laughing at. Poetry is an extension of himself. It's natural, authentic, and purposeful, and that makes how he uses language all the more powerful.
There are two Bob Marley quotes that come to mind that I want to say. One is, I think it goes beyond Bob Marley actually, I think it was a long time before Bob Marley, but he sang it in a song. Who feels it knows it, right? That speaks for itself. You know? But the other one, and probably more important, is the one I go by all the time, is live for yourself, you live in vain. Live for others, you live again. That doesn't have to be religious. That doesn't have to be spiritual, although it can be. That can just be in terms of giving your life some purpose.
For me, Benjamin brought political and social context woven through lines and verses into my classroom. Through his literature, he brought perspective in stories that showed us that we're way more interconnected than we think. I think that same ability to relate to others was essential to allowing important conversations to be had during that summer in 2020. I'm going to take a leaf out of Benjamin's book and show people how interconnected British history really is. So that's it for English class, but history's next. In that lesson, I'm going to take you through the story of Dr. Paul Stevenson, a man responsible for organising the civil rights movement that fought to bring about the first laws criminalising racism in Britain.
Mr. Stevenson, I have to go.
If your hiring methods for the bus crew continues to be discriminatory, we shall organise a protest in response. Black people in Bristol will stop using your services altogether, Mr. Patey.
Do your worst, Mr. Stevenson.
We've got our work cut out if we're going to fill out all these gaps in history. But that's one down, and I've got more lined up for you. Make sure to leave plenty of time to make your way to the next lesson, and I'll see you next time. I'm Tommy Dixon, and we've been Colouring in Britain. Colouring in Britain was written, produced, and presented by me, Tommy Dixon. The actors were Danielle Vitalis, Amar Duffus, Matthew Durkin, Jonathan Forbes, Colin Ryan, Lloyd Thomas, and Alexandra Hannant. Technical production was by Donald McDonald, Keith Graham, and Mike Etherden. The production mentors were Alistair Cross and Kieran Birmingham. The executive producers were Leanne Ali and Calic Mir. It was commissioned for BBC Sounds Audio Lab by Calic Mir.
I mean, that was amazing. Congratulations on like having made such a like I think felt like there was so much warmth in the episode. Like I think probably Benjamin himself is like brings a lot of that, but in the way you directed the interview, your voice, your commentary, plus the scenes, there was just like so much warmth, and I thought it was really, moving at parts of it. And I already knew quite a lot about Benjamin Zephaniah, but I also learned a bunch of things. So yeah, like thank you for making that.
Thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys all enjoyed.
I guess I'll ask a first question, and if anybody else listening has questions, please write them in the chat. And I love the detail, by the way, that when you were a child, the teacher said, "I never thought I'd have to tell a kid to stop reading." Like, that was such a great moment. So you kind of integrated these sort of dramatized scenes, like based on reality, but using, I guess, actors and stuff. Can you tell us a bit more about with these interviews and your like monologue or presenting? Can you tell us a bit more about, like, where did you get that idea from to kind of bring these things together, and also about the process of like casting and directing actors? Or I assume they were actors, but yeah.
Yeah. They were all actors. I was really inspired, actually, again, by the podcast that I was listening to. One in particular was called Sneakonomics, which was a podcast made by Radio 4 and the producer Sasha Yevtushenko, and essentially was all around trainers or sneakers, whatever you'd like to call them. But how the history of them kind of coincide with moments in history. So like, from, you know, the formation of Adidas by the Dassler brothers, and how they started out on, you know, creating this company, but their split of their relationship led to the creation of Adidas and Puma, and like, essentially to highlight you know, really significant moments, like the collaboration between Run DMC and Adidas, and why Run DMC are so synonymous with Adidas. They took you to that moment of their concert. I think it was in the 80s, and how everyone in the crowd took off their Adidas Superstar and put it up in the air, and then that's why the collaboration kind of came across, because there was an Adidas rep in the crowd. Basically, I loved how they took you to moments in time to really understand why something is so significant. And when I was thinking about how I was going to be able to tell all these histories and try and explain to somebody why this person or this moment in history is so significant, instead of me telling you about it, why don't you experience it? So that's why I wanted to use drama. And I think sometimes when it comes to podcasting, if you want to create like a real immersive experience, it's combining a lot of those techniques, whether it be scripting, whether it be sound design, whether it be drama, or whether it be, you know, anything else. So I think I was inspired by some of the stuff that I was seeing in other podcasts, and when I was reading about Benjamin's story and life, as you can hear, it's almost like the human experience it's a bit of this and a bit of that, and it kind of takes you around all these sort of different bits that kind of make him who he is. Some of them were so vivid, I could picture them. So I wanted to recreate those moments. And when Benjamin's talking about, you know, having success in his career, and the moment that he got a bit of success and he, you know, bought himself a really, really nice car, which anyone should be allowed to do. As soon as he took it out of the lot and went out into the street, a police officer stopped him and said, "You shouldn't have this car. I'm going to take it." Like, for someone to explain that to you, you're like, that's crazy. That would never ever happen. But it did. So I'm going to allow you to have this experience to be able to like really understand what racism during this period of time was like for people. What it's like when you could you know, be a punk or a Rasta, or just want to go to an event in London, and there is the real threat of the National Front turning up, smashing up the set, your life being in danger. You know, what it's like just to exist as a person. I think there are some things that you just kind of have to experience, and dramatization was my mechanic of helping people understand and experience those things in Benjamin's life.
And just to follow up quickly, like, and what about the like practically, how did you cast the actors? How did you find them? How did you direct them? How did you find that experience?
Oh, okay. So I'll be honest with you. It was pretty exciting. I had never ever done drama before, so I had a lot of help actually from my mentors, Kieran Birmingham and Alistair Cross. So we I had a look on Spotlight, which is a tool that a lot of people in the industry use to find voiceover actors, like people for commercials and all that sort of stuff, like brilliant actors and talent basically. And we got into the studio basically, and I had a script. They had like the day before, a couple of days to have the script, and we kind of got into studio and we went over the scenes, and we
So you did it actually all in person in a studio?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was inside the BBC. We had there's like a specific drama studio where pretty like a lot of BBC drama is done. And like we did like the Foley, everything. So like all the doors smashing, they got different types of doors to be able to get different sounds. But like some of the stuff like the glass smashing was like that's like kind of post-production, but like yeah, like to get the right acoustics and to get the right Foley and sounds, but then also as well directing actors as well. Like they'll be inside the room, and if you want a bit more tambourine, like go in, like you just give me a little bit more of that. So it's a little bit of back and forth to be able to really draw out this picture that you have in your head, really. And the people that I worked with for this episode and throughout the series, my company, were amazing, and they really helped bring those visions that I had to life.
That's lovely. It's cool that you got to do it in person. So there's talking about how you wanted it to be immersive. We have a question. Well, thanks so much for letting us listen to such an inspirational and tender episode. But do you think it's necessary for it to be immersive? Do you need to have a narrator? Or do you think you could have made it as immersive without a narrator in it?
I think that's one of the beautiful things about audio. I think there's so much flex. Like if you wanted to remove a narrator and have your protagonist purely just be Benjamin, or whoever it was that you were interviewing, I think you can fully do that. Like if we're talking about some other work that I've done, like so on Outlook, sometimes we create almost like these montage pieces where like we'll interview somebody and we'll sound design around it, and I basically put like an anno at the top, just a bit of script at the top and a bit of script at the bottom, just to kind of introduce and finish the episode. But it could purely just be like the contributor. I think it just depends on what you're aiming to do with the piece. I feel like with this episode, I think because you're telling a life story, but then also as well, I wanted to set out what my personal connection was to Benjamin. So therefore, I had to narrate and explain why it is that we're going on this journey and speaking with this person and my connection to this person, and then also to kind of do a bit of the admin signposting stuff. But yeah, no, you can have a narrator, you can choose not to have a narrator. It just kind of depends on why you would need a narrator. If you need one, you can use one, but if not,
I really enjoyed that it was Benjamin's story, but also your story with Benjamin. I thought that was like a really nice pairing.
Thank you.
So another question is, before you went to do the interview in person, how much of it had you already planned out of the episode?
Oh, quite a lot, quite a lot. I had done tons of research already. Um, like I think I referenced in there. I had watched his performance of Pen Rhythm, which was a documentary done by Channel 4, I think during the 70s or 80s. Really, I think it was like the second ever program on that Channel 4. But essentially, yeah, I did do quite a lot of research. But what I found when I got to the interview was that I had a whole heap ton of stuff, but then some of it we just kind of went with it. And you know that there'll be moments where I would ask Benjamin something, he would answer the question, and then we'd have a little chat, and then all of a sudden he's bursting out into poetry and he's performing. So like I think a lot of those natural organic moments that we got, I still personally I still get a bit of goosebumps sometimes when I hear this interview, just because he he's just so natural, and like there's a nice connection between us two. And I think sometimes when you're hearing stories, I think you do kind of want those moments of warmth where, as much as you know the information of what someone did from step one, step two, step three, step four is important, but like them just being real and just being human is just as entertaining as that. So yeah, so those bits where he was just really natural, and we had some really warm moments. I wanted to include that as much as possible, just because, as I kind of set out, it's my personal connection with this contributor. So I wanted to try and keep that connection to the forefront as much as possible.
So had you already because you'd done a lot of research, so you knew a lot about his life story before. So had you already got quite a detailed storyboard of what you wanted the episode to look like before you even went to the interview? And then you mostly followed the storyboard in the production after the interview, or did you have to change whole bits? Or
you know what? I think in regards to the whole series, I think Benjamin, I followed the script the least. Like the next story that you hear, episode 2, Paul Stevenson, is very much kind of like A to B, very storyboarded. But I feel because a lot of the figures that I covered had passed. Benjamin was Paul Stevenson was alive at that moment in time, but he's recently just passed away. He suffered from dementia and he was in a care home at the time, so we didn't have quite a lot of time with him. But because Benjamin was alive and we could get a lot of anecdotes and quotes from him, I think we freestyled a bit more with Benjamin's episode than we did other people.
And how long did you have with him? How long was the interview?
It was about an hour and a half, somewhere around that. So yeah, so it was a decent amount of material, and then obviously we had all the drama bits as well, plus the narration. So trying to condense and squash that was a bit of a process, but yeah, it was really important to try and take some of the main snapshots of Benjamin's life, and allow other parts to kind of breathe a little bit more, where you got a bit more of his character, and you kind of got Benjamin to kind of showcase why he's the brilliant poet and writer and figure that he is.
Yeah, it felt like there was a lot going on, but to me it didn't feel overly packed, because you still had those small moments of like the laughter between the two of you, or this kind of like spontaneous. It didn't feel like overly dense to me as a listener anyway, because it felt like there was a lot in it, right? But not too much. Okay, so another question is, how does the intellectual property work with recordings of real people in general, and specifically also of people who've since passed away? And this person asks from a perspective of somebody who's keen to experiment with candid filmed recordings.
When you say the IP, what exactly are you referring to?
Do you want to?
Yeah,
so I mean, certainly in film and television, when you're like the baby reindeer scandal, sort of exposed some issues with using real people. So you've recorded Benjamin. I'm sure he gave you his words freely with love, but legally, you know, does his estate own his IP, which is, I don't know, when you did it, was it an informal arrangement, and now it's been broadcast on the BBC? I don't really understand whether there's any complexities to navigate within the sort of legal side of things.
Yeah, no, of course. Okay, that makes it a bit. Yeah, I understand it much more. So what I would say is that if you are going to do recordings with people or interviews with people, it's always great to get consent. Like obviously like email, like written consent, but also as well, if you're interviewing people, get like recorded consent as well, that they're happy for you to be able to do this interview. We had contributor forms that some people in the BBC, it depends, different people do it differently in the BBC, but for every single person who we interviewed for this series, we had contributor forms. So them signing that they were happy to partake in this interview, and everything that was recorded within the interview is owned by the BBC. So I guess in terms of rights to be able to broadcast the content that we recorded, we were all covered. But yeah, if you want to get consent from people, written and recorded consent, I think is a nice fail-safe.
Yeah, that's a great, like say on the mic, you know, it's up just to make sure, you know, just to confirm you're happy for this to be recorded. I think that's a wonderful. But I suppose the issue that I have with what I'm attempting to do is I have great conversations with people, and then as soon as we should make this podcast, and as soon as we attempt and we know that the mic's there, the dynamic changes, the openness changes, so I'm just wondering how I could have those sorts of conversations or just serendipitous encounters out in the field, and then once I've edited that down, I don't know, it could be a fisherman selling mussels by the quayside in Cornwall, and he's not anybody famous, but I've captured his sound and his shtick for selling, and I suppose I could go back to him and get a release form, or I don't really.
Yeah, you know what? I think it is always a bit like you want to capture that authenticity, that naturalness. Like when you go ahead and record like the first time, I think depending on if this is like a scheduled interview that you've got with somebody, if like I don't know, like you're gonna record with them next week, you might, what is a really great thing to do to make sure that if someone is, you know, a bit nervous or you're worried that they might get a bit performative, I think is like doing a research call before. If you do a research call before, you can have that conversation and touch on those points that you want to actually get to when you do the actual interview, but also you can build the rapport with them. So when you guys chat again, they've already done it before, so they're probably a lot more relaxed and super chill. They probably know, like people are worried about like getting things wrong. So if they've done it already, they're probably less nervous about it. But then also as well, they know you. So like it probably will be a bit more natural. But I think if you're kind of doing it on the fly, if you're, you know, recording out in the field and you're meeting people, I think I think just kind of reassuring people that like it's super chill, super relaxed, or like just hit them with an icebreaker first, like just a random question that will just like throw them off, that they don't feel like it's an interview. I think when people are told you're going to be recorded. This is an interview. They instantly like try and become very BBC, or like become like pun. But like they just they try and give you what they think you want, which isn't actually what you want. So just try and distract them, be as charming as possible, if you can. Like I think yeah, like try and make them feel like it's not an interview and reassure them that that's the case, and hopefully they can actually give you something that you want. I hope that helps.
That's great. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Thank you. Off to charm school for me then.
Best of luck.
Perfect. Next question is, how did you choose which people you wanted to cover through the series? Did some people who you initially wanted to do stories on not end up in the final series?
It's a good question. So some people we did try to get. I really wanted Mallory Blackman. I really wanted her, but we didn't end up getting her in the end. I wanted Jamal Edwards as well. I also wanted Jenny Francis as well. I wanted a lot of people.
You had a long wish list.
A long wish list. Yeah, there were some stories that I was considering, but maybe didn't. Yeah, it was like really sad actually. That was the year Jamal passed away. So when we were trying to put a bid in, I think maybe a week or two he passed, and it just didn't feel like the right time essentially to so we didn't pursue on that, but hopefully we can do some of those people and tell their stories if we get a follow-up season. But yeah, so is
there going to be a season 2, a series 2?
Well, hopefully that's the plan.
With Mallory Blackman.
Hopefully that's the plan. I'm actually in the process of trying to find the stories for season 2. We just done Colouring in Britain's first ever live show in the Radio Theatre, which was incredible. But anyway, sorry, I digress. Yes, there were some stories, and I think what I really wanted to do in this season in particular was that I wanted to tell really significant stories that I was personally connected to, and I felt that people should know about. But also as well, I think I wanted to speak to people, speak about people who have had incredible impacts within their community. So we covered Benjamin Zephaniah, who was an incredible activist and the mouthpiece for, I guess, Forgotten Britain, but a voice for the voiceless. We had Paul Stevenson, who was also an activist and a campaigner, and he helped bring about the first ever laws that helped prevent discrimination in housing and work and public spaces. Princess Campbell, who became Bristol's first ward sister, Black ward sister, but also as well, she was a real community figure too. And lastly, Claudia Jones, who established Britain's first ever Britain's first Black newspaper, large scale newspaper, and she's also famously known as the mother of Carnival. So a lot of the stories were focused around people who've done a lot of stuff within community, and that's not to say other people didn't as well, but they were just stories that really spoke to me. And it was a good mixture of some stories that people might know about, Carnival, for example, Benjamin Zephaniah being a very public figure, but also really important people who spoke to communities in Bristol, or people who had done incredible things like Paul Stevenson, but maybe don't get the notoriety that they should do, because their work impacts how we interact with one another and how people can, get jobs or live in places without the fear of discrimination. So those were some of the stories that really spoke to me, and those are the ones that I wanted to tell. But there are also many other stories that I'm hoping to tell in subsequent seasons of Colouring in Britain.
I'm just going to give the everybody listening the warning that we've got to finish in about 5-10 minutes. So if you have any questions that you're not sure what to ask, now is the time to ask them.
Okay.
And while you type out your question, so if you are hoping to make a season 2, which I hope you get the opportunity to, you have, I imagine, learned a lot more through making this and also in the last years of your career. What would you want to do differently in the season 2, or what would you want to like bring new to a second series?
I think, firstly, yes, I have learned so much. I think since I created this, I've gone on to, I recently produced a series all about the history of UK garage, which was an incredible series. I really had a lot of fun doing that. But also as well, I've been working at Outlook, where we do lots of long form interviews. So in terms of like my ability to produce and edit and, like life stories in general, I've got tons of that. And I think what I would do differently in this season of Colouring in Britain is I think I'd like to utilize a bit more drama, because I think what I really enjoyed throughout the series was, taking people to those moments in history and allowing them to be able to experience those stories. I think I would like to explore different periods of British history. I think quite a lot of the time periods that we kind of focused on in this series, like 60s, 70s, 80s, Britain. I think I'd like to explore different periods as well, just to kind of give you a different look at a different period of what life within Britain was like. But then also as well, I think what was really amazing about our live show was that we got a lot of feedback from younger people who wanted to hear about specific parts of British history, and I think they were quite interested in like kind of like storytellers, so like filmmakers and authors and things like that. And I think me as a storyteller, it would be really interesting to explore what it was like for other storytellers during different periods of British history, and how they utilized mediums to tell stories that were important to them. So potentially that could be something really interesting to explore. So those are the things that I'd like to have a look at.
Well, I can't wait to listen to it when hopefully it comes out. And so where can people find you, follow you, to see if there is a season 2 and to find out about other work that you're making?
Yeah, so I'm probably most active on Instagram, I'd say. So my handle on Instagram is Mr. T Dixon _. I'm also active and posting on Twitter. It's the same handle as well, and LinkedIn as well, where Tommy Dixon. So you can see all the good stuff that I'm getting up to. Yeah, and if people have any questions or or want any advice or just want to chat about audio, hit me up. I'm always down to talk.
Okay, wonderful. Well, there's no more questions in the chat except for requests for another session on the UK garage story. So just an invitation to come back, I think.
Oh, okay, appreciate it. Oh, and also the name of the series is Music Uncovered, the UK Garage Story. So if you're into your sweet like chocolates and your so solids and your Kelly LaRocks and the like, please feel free. It is a blast from the musical past that I'm sure you'll really enjoy.
There's lots of enthusiastic nodding. So, wonderful. Okay, thanks so much for joining this series. Both to you, Tommy, and to the people listening. I'm going to stop recording now.